All right, so in this lesson, we're going to talk about routes and navigation in Flutter. And these are ways for us to be able to have multi-screen or multi-page apps, and not something that's limited to just a single page. And in order to do that, we need to know about routes and navigation. So in Flutter, there's a little bit of terminology here. When we talk about routes, it's actually synonymous with screens and pages. And so whenever I'm talking about routes, just think a way of getting to a screen or a page in your app. Now, we have different routes in real life. So if I wanted to go from home to a restaurant, I might take one route. So that's the restaurant route. But if I wanted to go to the airport, then I would take the airport route, right? And this is the same with our apps. If I wanted to go to a particular screen, say screen 1, I would need to trigger the screen 1 route. So this is how we organize multi-page, multi-screen apps in Flutter. So for every single screen that you have in your app, you should have a tour guide, or in this case, a Flutter navigator that takes you on each of these routes to see each of these screens. So if you head over to our repo here, under london.brewery/navigation-flutter-demo, which I'll of course link to in the course resources, we've got a simple Flutter app here that I want you to clone. So go ahead and copy the URL and go into Android Studio and create a new project from our version control. So we're going to select Git, and then we're going to paste this in here and then save it anywhere you wish. So hit clone, and we should be able to open up that demo project that I created. Run, as usual, your get dependencies and go into the navigation Flutter demo library to see the 4 files that we've already created for you. Now, the main.dart file is not very exciting. All it does is it returns a material app that has a home that starts at screen 1. So let's open up screen 1, and you can see all it has is an app bar that's red, has the name screen 1, and a button which says go forwards to screen 2. So screen 2 is pretty much the same story, but it has a blue app bar and it has a button that says go back to screen 1. So if we go ahead and run our app, you can see, as promised, screen 1 is pretty simple. It's just got an app bar and a button. Now, at the moment, when I click on this button to go to screen 2, nothing happens. And this is as expected because in the on-pressed, it's completely empty in that callback. So let's see how we can create a route to screen 2 so that we can see it when we press on that button. Now, Flutter has done a really good job of creating these cookbooks that we've been seeing along the course. And one of these tells you exactly how to create a navigation towards a new screen and how to go back. So we've already created our 2 routes, the screen 1 and screen 2. Now, all we need to do is use something called navigator.push to add a route to the stack of routes. And what push does is very similar to when you push pancakes onto a stack, right? You would just add them one by one on top of each other. It's a stack that goes on top, and when you decide that you want to eat a pancake or you want to pop off a pancake, then it's the top one that comes off. So this is very similar to how our screens are organized in our app. They each go on top of each other, and it's only when the top ones come off that we actually see the screen that's behind it. So let's try and do this pancake maneuver in code. Now, as it says, we have to use the navigator.push method, and we have to pass in 2 things, a context and also build a material page route and tell it where we want to go. Now, the context refers to the build context. We saw this a little bit earlier on when we tried to copy the current slider theme. And to do that, we said, give me the slider theme of the current context. So that's the current build context. And every widget has one. It's simply a way to figure out where in the widget tree this particular widget lives. And by passing it a context, it helps Flutter figure out where we are and where we need to go. So let's try and go ahead and push screen 2 onto screen 1. So inside the file called screen1, inside the onPressed, we're going to call navigator. And remember, every single stateless widget has one. As long as your scaffold is inside its own widget, then it should be able to call navigator.push. And the context is going to be the current build context of our screen1 widget, which is the current location of our widget in the overall widget tree. So this is a small widget tree, which is going to be embedded in a large widget tree when the app runs, and the location of it is determined by this context. So that's the first thing it needs. The second thing it needs is a root, and we're going to be using that material page root to build the second root. So let's pass in the material page root, and the builder is going to take a function. So it's going to be a function that has an input called context, and then it has a body which is going to return whatever it is that we want to navigate to. So in this case, it's a new screen2 object. And let's cap that off with a semicolon as well and add all of our commas so that Dart will be able to reformat our code. Now, at the moment, it doesn't know what screen2 is, even though we can see clearly that we have a screen2. And this is because we haven't yet imported the screen2.dart file. So now if we hit save and we check out our app, when I click on this button, it takes me to screen2. And it's even clever enough to know that, for example, on iOS, when new screens come on top, it comes usually from the right and it gets pushed on top in this kind of animation. So by using this material page root, it actually helps us automatically determine what kind of animation we need. So if you go into the Flutter inspector and you click on this button right here, which toggles the platform, so now I have a Android-y looking screen, even though I'm running it on an iOS simulator. And you know this because our title is right at the left corner of our app bar. And when I click on the button to go to screen2, it actually pops it up from the bottom, which is the difference between iOS and Android. And that's all pre-baked in by the Flutter team. And all you have to do is use this material page root builder. So let's toggle our platform back to iOS, or keep it on Android if you want. And now we're going to try and figure out how can we go back to screen 1 by pressing this button. Just as I said before, we can push and we can also pop. So pop is much easier because all it needs to do is to destroy the top screen so that we go back to the one that's below. Inside our screen2.dart, when the go back to screen 1 button is pressed, all we need to do is write navigator.pop, and it will pop the current screen and destroy it. So now let's hit save and check it out. Go back to screen 1. That's exactly what it does. And we can now go between 1 and 2 as much as we wish. So that's pretty cool. But what if we had a more complex app with lots of roots? Say, for example, we had a screen 0, which had 2 buttons. One to go to screen 1, and the second button should take us to screen 2. Well, we can achieve that quite easily using named roots. Again, in the cookbook, it describes how we can do this. So let's go to the one which is navigate with named roots. And we've already created our 2 screens, and now we have to define the roots. And we're going to do that where we create our material app. So in our case, that's going to be in our main.dart file. So instead of having our home or our starting point as screen 1, let's change it to screen 0 so I can show you what it looks like. Now, of course, we have to import screen0.dart in order to be able to use it. So let's write screen0.dart and let's hit save. And now, because we want to go right back to the beginning, we're going to click on hot restart. So we go back into our main.dart and we go on to screen 0. So screen 0 has 2 buttons, go to screen 1 or go to screen 2. And when I click on them, it should take me to the correct route. How do I implement this? Well, our material app also has a property called routes, and this allows us to define what's called a map. So a map is similar to a dictionary in other programming languages, and it's basically a collection type. Just as lists are collections of items, maps are also collections. But the difference between maps and lists is that maps have a key and a value. Just as your dictionary has a term and the definition, maps also have the same thing. So we can define our routes using this map construct, which we're going to talk a lot more about in the next lesson. So we're going to see it in action, but if you want to get a deeper understanding of Dart maps, keep going through this lesson, and once you get to the next lesson, we're going to explain it in greater detail. But it's super simple to use, and just looking at it, you'll probably already understand how it works. Let's look at how routes are defined. We can create a map which has a key and a value. So it means that when the route that is / is requested, we should build the first screen. Or when the route that's called /second is requested, then we should build the second screen. So pretty simple so far. Now let's define that for our app. So let's go ahead and create a map first. And we can do that just by opening a set of curly braces and hitting enter. So inside here is going to be our map, and it's going to have some keys and some values, and the keys and values will match up. So the key is the name of the route. So let's have a route that's just / and then we add a colon to specify the value for that route. And you can see that our route expects a function as the value of the map. So the string is going to be the key, in this case it's the name of the route, and the value is going to be a function that takes a context as an input and returns a widget. So in our case, it's going to take a context as the input and it's going to return a widget, which is going to be the widget that we want displayed when this route is requested. So the one that we want is going to be screen 0 for when the route is /. Now, then we can go ahead and define some more routes. Let's have a /first. And this is the key. So the value for it is going to be another context that returns maybe screen 1 in this case. So now we've associated the name of / with going to screen 0 and /first with going to screen 1. Now all we need to do is to add one last one, which is /second. And this should go to the second screen, of course. So screen 2. And we have to add this into our imports to tell it about this screen2.dart file. Now that we've created all of our named routes, let's go ahead and use it. Now you can see that we normally use a home property for our material app to define where the app should start, which screen it should display first. But instead of this, we could also use a property called initial route. And we can simply just give it a string to tell it which route we want out of all the ones that we've defined. So let's tell it to start off at screen 0 by giving it just the string that is /. So now if I go ahead and hot restart my app, it should look exactly the same because it's still going to go to screen 0. Now be careful though, because if you have an initial route and you also have a home property defined, so let's add what we had before, which is screen 0. Now, these two will conflict with each other. And if I hit save right now, you can see my app will crash. And it tells me that only one of them can exist. So I can't define both a start and a beginning. That doesn't make any sense in code. So let's delete the home whenever we're using an initial route. And if you want, you can just use home instead of initial route. But given that we've got all the routes defined already, it makes sense to do it this way. It's much easier. So now let's try and use these routes inside our screen 0 ... At the place where we want to navigate to screen 1, we can do this using our named routes by simply saying navigator dot push, but instead of just pushing and creating a route, we can push a named route instead. So in this case, we have our current context of where we are in the app, but we also are going to define the route name, which is just the string that we created here. So we can simply write /first if we want to go to the first screen. And if we wanted to go to the second screen, when we click on this second screen button, then we can say go to /second. And this, of course, corresponds to the routes that we created in here. So it's going to look at the key that matches /first to figure out what it should do from the value. So now if we hit save and we check out our app, when I click on go to screen 1, it goes to screen 1. When I click on go to screen 2, it goes to screen 2. Now, all of my buttons that use the navigator where I create the routes from scratch still work. So I can still go to screen 2 from screen 1. But now in my stack, I have 3 screens, 0, 1, and 2, all stacked on top of each other. And if I keep clicking the back button, it'll take me all the way back to the beginning. So the navigator is a really easy way of going between screens and going between our routes. And as your app gets more complex, you're probably going to have more and more routes, and you're going to need complex ways of navigating between them. So I would say that if you have a very simple app with only 2 or 3 screens, then probably creating the route at the point where you need to is probably good enough. But if you have a complex app with 4 or more screens, then it makes sense to list out all the routes in the beginning and make the navigation code much more expressive and easier to write in the actual screen. So now that you've learned all about routes and navigation, then guess what? We need to create a new page and we need to navigate to it. So I'm going to right click on my lib folder and I'm going to create a new Dart file, which is going to be called results_page. And I'm going to hit OK to create my new results page.dart. I'm going to import my material package. And we're going to create a very simple stateless widget in here. So it's going to be called results page. And here we're going to simply return a scaffold that contains a app bar, which is simply going to have the title of BMI calculator. And it's also going to have a body, which is just going to have a little bit of text that says hello, or whatever you want it to be. It's just so that we can confirm when we've navigated to this new page that we've actually got the code set up correctly. Now that we have our results page, we can go back to our inputs page. And at the very last part where we have a container, we're going to give it a little bit of text. So we'll add a child that is a text widget, and it's going to say calculate. Now our container, in order for it to receive taps, we have to wrap it with a gesture detector. And when it is tapped, we're going to go ahead and create our route. Now the challenge is in your court. Implement what you've learned about route and navigation to be able to take the user from the first screen where we have all our inputs to the second screen when they click on that calculate button. Pause the video and try to complete the challenge. All right, so in this case, we're only navigating between 2 screens, so we're probably not going to create named routes, but we can instead use our trusty navigator.push method. And we've got our context as the current context, and the route is going to be a material page route. And in order to build it, we need to give it a function, which takes a context as the input, and it returns. So you could either use a set of curly braces and write return, Or remember that the shorthand way of doing this, if you have a single line of code, is just a fat arrow, so an equal sign and an angle bracket. And we can return our results page. And it's not showing up because we don't yet have it imported. So let's import that at the top, and we have our results page.dart imported. So now if we hit save and we run our app, then you can see that when we click on the calculate button, which is anywhere inside this pink area, it will take us to our second screen, which has the word hello and the app bar of BMI calculator. And this is also a good point to point out that all of the hard work that we've did in defining the theme for our app is now carried through to our second screen as well, with the same primary color and the same scaffold background color and text colors. Now that we're able to navigate between our pages, the only thing left to do is to update the styling a little bit more and to actually calculate the user's BMI and display it on screen. But as promised, in the next lesson, we're going to do a deep dive on Dart maps so that you can learn a bit more about what all of these maps are that you're seeing in the named route and how these key value pairs work in Dart. Now, if you're already quite familiar with maps or dictionaries and how they look and how they work in Dart, then feel free to skip the next lesson and go to the lesson afterwards where we continue building out our app. But either way, I'll see you on the next lesson.